Welcome to me, where suspenseful, thrilling, and mysterious stories will draw you into a world where the lines between reality and fantasy seem to blur. When the night falls, when all the sounds gradually quiet down, leaving only your own heartbeat and breathing, that's when these stories begin. Tensions, unsolved mysteries, moments that will make you hold your breath in fear or curiosity, all are waiting for you ahead. Find a comfortable seat, dim the lights, and let this sound guide you on a journey that is not for the faint of heart. I want each of you to leave a comment sharing where you are in the world. And if you are enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel now. Relax. Are you ready? If so, join me in the first story right now. Jailbreak. The cold, sterile hallway just outside of my confinement center wall made it possible to hear every footstep, growing louder as they neared me, fading as the person receded into the distance, marching to whatever task they were assigned. It was impossible to know how long I'd been here. Minutes felt like days. Hours felt like months. All I knew was that it was time. What was that quote from the Shawshank Redemption? Get busy livin' or get busy dyin'. It was now or never. I'd spent the last several months learning the patterns and rhythms of this facility, and I'd discovered that it was possible to make an escape undetected. It was, however, highly improbable. The odds of being discovered were astronomically high, and the consequences ranged from merely being returned to captivity, or, well, one simply had to come to terms with the risk being worth the reward. My mind was made up. The door to my cell was never locked, interestingly enough. The reality was I could walk out at any time, but that didn't make me any less of a captive. They knew that I couldn't just leave, and that made them reckless with this one very simple security measure. There were others here, too, held in similar circumstances as myself. If my plan was to work, if I could make my way to freedom, there would be new protocols put in place. The others would feel those consequences. That thought had kept me from trying to escape before, that my freedom would lead to their pain. But as the days and months wore on, I'd shoved those thoughts aside. Surely they had tried and failed at exactly what I'm attempting now. Did they consider how their success would affect me? I strongly doubted it. It was every man for himself in here, despite the words I'd heard time and time again as the guards and wardens walked past my cage. Sunlight flooded through the one small window behind me. It seemed as though it had been weeks of gray skies. The warmth on my skin was all the encouragement that I needed. It was now or never. I listened for the sound of 2 sets of footsteps coming down the hallway. This pair always made their way along the corridor at the same time every day, always together. After them, there would be 2 more, but this time in singles, a few minutes apart. Then it would be time. They all needed to see me, to know I was still here. Their complacency must remain intact for my plan to succeed. The faint sound of 4 feet making their way towards me finally could be heard. The steps grew louder, keeping pace with the increasing pounding of my heart as I knew the time had come. Louder, louder, my pulse began to increase. I had to bring it down. This cannot be done if I can't control my nerves. I felt my hands begin to shake a little with the increased adrenaline. Sweat began to form ever so slightly beneath my arms. I had to get control. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then another. Then another. I cleared my mind of what was about to take place. I didn't need to go over the plan any further. I knew it well. I just needed to move with calm deliberation. Another deep breath. I felt my heart rate begin to slow. Another deep breath. My hands steadied. Then the plodding footsteps came to a stop just beyond my door. "Hello in there," came the much too delighted voice of the middling drone on patrol. He was happy to be here, happy to be in the slightest position of power over me. Had a few things gone differently, maybe it would be me out there and him in here. I like to think that I'm better than him, though. I'd help with someone's escape plan if I was alerted to it, not ratted out. Or, at the very least, I'd look the other way, but not him. No, he derives meaning from this tiny amount of authority. I won't give him the satisfaction of getting even a hint of what I'm about to do. "Hello, sir," I reply back, attempting to soften the terseness that I want to convey. The woman who patrols with him never acknowledges me. I can tell she believes he should be more dismissive of me, that he should use whatever mediocre power he has to diminish my existence even further. Nice to see the sun shining again, isn't it? It is. Hopefully, you'll get to enjoy it fully soon. I know I will. I continued to myself. Perhaps, but my shift does run pretty late into the day, so maybe another time. The woman sighed with impatience. Well, I should carry on. See you on the next pass. Yes, on the next pass. Good day, sir. Their footsteps fade into the cavernous recesses of the facility to my right as I await the next set of footsteps. The waiting seemed to be the worst part of my plan so far. It gave my heart too much time to become anxious, so I tried to occupy my mind with thoughts of how the woman would berate the man if my actions were ever discovered, particularly if it became known that mere minutes after they'd passed, I'd made my move. A smile drifted across my face at the thought of it. She clearly had some type of authority over him, but I knew for certain it wasn't in rank. Perhaps it was in that same way that many women had authority over many men throughout all of time. The issues that my leaving will cause him, the erosion of his pathetic authority, brought a great joy to me that steeled my nerves for my next encounter. I heard the clicking of heels echoing in my ears, and I braced myself for another interrogation. This time, however, there was only a slight pause, and then hurried footsteps away down the hall. I heard a slight commotion and some raised voices, an uncommon occurrence that I hoped would resolve itself quickly. I strained to listen, to determine if this new development would derail my escape before it had even truly begun. It's not what you think. Please? I just needed... You needed what? It was the man who had just stopped and spoke to me. He must have backtracked and surprised the poor guy, who clearly had the same thoughts of freedom as me. Why did he choose to go now? The timing was way off for any chance of success. Pathetic fool. I cursed him under my breath, because now they'd be on high alert, if they weren't already. Back in your cell. You don't come out until we say you can come out. I thought that was clear, but please, tell me if I need to make it more so. Do you want me to do that? No, sir. That won't be necessary. I'll have to report this, you know? You brought this on yourself. Perhaps the officers will have mercy. But it's really out of my hands. The silence that followed must have been the poor soul's sad acceptance of his fate. Finally, I heard everyone continue on their way, and I listened for the steps that would signal the beginning of my mission. I said a quick prayer that my outcome would not be the same as the one I'd just witnessed while the third patrol made its way to me. "Hello in there," came the petite voice of a woman nearing 60 years old. If she was a day, she really couldn't prevent anyone from leaving on her own. But that was just as true of the others who passed by here. Their abilities relied completely on their willingness to report to those who could act. Dodging detection by these tattletales was the only path to a successful jailbreak. "Hello, ma'am," I replied back, hoping I concealed my utter disdain. Calling me ma'am is unnecessary, but even more, it is unwanted. You make me feel old. My apologies. Nice to see the sun out again, isn't it? She examined me as she asked the question. It was not small talk. She was searching me. Yes, it is. It's been a while. Hopefully, you'll get out to enjoy it. My heart rate began to rise slightly as I replied. Her eyes pierced into mine as I took slow, deliberate breaths to calm myself. I can't imagine I appeared nonchalant, but hopefully, at the very least, I wasn't giving away my intentions. Well, I have a long day here, so it's hard to say, she said at last. My heart beat began to return to normal. See you on the next pass. Yes, on the next pass. Good day, Ma. I caught myself before the word fully formed. Good day, miss. She smiled at that, turned, and began to slowly walk toward my right, just as the others had. When I heard her steps turn the far corner and vanish, it was time for me to go. I stepped out slowly, looking both ways. The coast was clear, so I hurried to my left, careful not to break into a run, as the sound of my steps might give me away to someone I couldn't see. Around the corner to my right, there was a large desk and 2 chairs. I had discovered that this desk was only occupied 2 days a week. Today was not one of them, so I slipped behind it and waited. Now my heart was racing, but that was of no concern. If I was seen at this point, it was all over anyway. I only needed my nerves to stay intact enough to remember my plan. And if I'm being honest, the adrenaline would help my focus. This next part was crucial. I peeked under the desk and waited. Soon 8 sets of shoes appeared from the direction I needed to go. They would pass this desk and then break off in 2 separate directions, as they always did. I had never seen them, but I could hear them from my cell. If they saw me behind this desk, I was done for. It was the biggest risk to my plan that I was aware of. But they always seemed so engaged in chatting with each other that I felt like it was a risk worth taking. I tried making myself as small as I could and steadied my breathing. One glance in the wrong direction by any of these 8 sets of eyes could cost me everything. I closed my eyes and just listened. It sounded just like it always had. This group was all men. They were young and constantly spoke over each other, trying to one-up the last story, get a bigger laugh, be a bigger idiot. But their youth didn't make them any less dangerous. In fact, it was probably the opposite. They had more to gain by exposing someone like me trying to escape. Thankfully, they seemed to be their normal, obnoxious selves today. They loudly caravanned past me, but then they stopped abruptly. That wasn't normal. Did you hear that? One of them asked no one in particular. The group continued to jabber on. Wait. Shh, he said more forcefully. Panic began to form in my chest. I tried to make myself even smaller and more invisible underneath the desk as I held my breath, desperately trying not to make even a whisper. When the whole group was fully compliant in listening intently, the questioner let out the longest, loudest, most foul flatulence directly at my hiding place. He erupted in laughter as the rest of the group had mixed reactions of laughter or complete disgust, while I did my absolute best to not give myself away. A cough building in my chest as my eyes began to water. At last, the group moved on, splitting into 2 groups of morons, as was the usual course of action. When the sound of both had sufficiently faded, I collapsed onto the floor and allowed myself the smallest of coughs to clear my lungs before peeking out to be certain I was alone. The next doorway I needed was down the hall, where the dangerous imbeciles had come from. Once I went through those doors, I was in foreign territory. I had no idea what the comings and goings would be like, so I'd have to maintain strict diligence of focus. Certain that no one could see me, I crept from my safe zone and stayed low and against the wall, heading to the next door. I put my ear against it and listened. Silence. I cracked it open and slowly entered the next room. To my left was a bank of elevators. To my right, a restroom. But the hallway was empty. I stepped into the open and was deciding on whether an elevator or the stairwell was riskier when I heard voices approaching the door at the far end. Without a thought, I leapt to my right and into the restroom. I pushed a stall door open, closed it quickly behind me, turned the lock, and climbed onto the toilet, using my hands to balance against the walls of the stall, formulating a plan of what to do in the event that the group followed me into the restroom became unnecessary, as I heard them pause outside of the door and briefly chat before moving away. I wasn't sure where they had gone, or even if all of them had left. But I had to keep moving. I had no choice. I slipped out of the stall and poked my head out of the restroom. The hallway was once again empty. I decided to take the elevator down. There was an equal chance of an encounter with someone either way, but at least the elevator was faster. I needed luck for this to succeed, at this point anyway, so I pushed the button. The cables and gears of the elevator working sounded as though they were beckoning the whole building to take notice of the fugitive awaiting the doors to open. It felt like days passed, but finally, the elevator arrived. I was prepared to flee to my restroom of refuge if someone was in the car. But fate shined on me and I stepped inside and pushed the fear of having nowhere to run deep inside as the doors closed in front of me. I had to get down 4 floors. If I could do that, I would be able to taste freedom. To this point, my vanishing act seemed to have gone unnoticed. I heard no alarms. No one seemed to be chasing me. The doors opened on the ground floor, and I stepped tentatively out, checking both directions. The lobby that the lift exited to was empty, aside from a few chairs and one low table. There was one guard station I had to get past, and then I simply needed to keep moving, far away from this place. The guard's head was down, distracted by whatever was keeping him glued to his phone. He didn't know me. I could simply walk past him, but even that seemed like a risk. It was not the time to get sloppy. Hugging the wall, I walked closer to the officer until I felt I had no choice but to crouch down. I still needed to move quickly in case anyone from the 4th floor found their way down here. But I'd have to do it from the ground. I laid flat and began to army crawl along the edge of the guard station's massive marble desk. When I'd reached the other side, I edged close to the wall again and inched my way to a standing position and began to walk. "Sir! Hey! Mister! Hey!" Panic. The guard must have finished his TV show at the worst possible time. I glanced back to see him getting out of his seat and coming my way. "Sir, you have to come back. Sir, you can't leave." Bet. I erupted into a sprint down the long hallway with windows on both sides. If anyone from the 4th floor could see me, it was all over. "You have to sign out. You can't just leave." Sign out? No way. The guard was gaining on me. He was fast, not like one of those lazy guards you'd see on TV who'd rather eat a donut than do a push-up. He was going to catch me before I could get off the grounds. It was over. I blasted through the door to the outside world and took the steps down 3 at a time. I heard the guard right behind me, closing in fast, just as a car pulled up and screeched to a stop. The door flung open. "Get in." I didn't stop to think. I jumped in and was closing the door as the car began to speed away. I glanced back to see the guard cursing and throwing his hands in the air before I turned to the driver. "Perfect timing," I grinned. "I wasn't sure if you could make it. You have your clubs? Matt's got 'em. He said he'd meet us there. So your boss let you go?" "Ha, no. But it's fine. No one knows I left. And by the time they find out, it won't raise any suspicions. No way I was missing the first round of spring. I knew it. I told them you'd make it. You just won me $20. Glad I could help you out. Buy me a beer at the turn. Now step on it. I want to putt a few before we have to tee off." The mannequin in the lake. Johnny and Sally didn't believe me when I told them the mannequin in the water had saved me from drowning. Well, something had pulled me down, and I suspected it had been her, but I didn't mention that part to my friends. Instead, I pointed to the exact spot where I believed she'd pulled me up from the rough Lake Michigan water. They laughed out loud. It's true. Her arms swayed forward and back. I swear. I motioned with my arms the same way the mannequin had done so. The marshmallow that was supposed to be for my s'more slipped out of my fingers. Sand covered my piece. For God's sake, I'd been looking forward to making them with my buddy and his girl. Sally guffawed. "You're so stupid, you know that? Plus, if you would have gotten more practice in class, you wouldn't have almost drowned." "Maybe I shouldn't be here with your stupid asses," I said, glowering at Johnny, who'd had the bright idea of skipping school. Just because he'd said, but I knew why. Because of her. Johnny had skipped school so many times that the teachers probably didn't even care to find out where he was. Me, though, this was only my second time. The first time was just a few days ago, the day the mannequin had saved me. I hurled the marshmallow into the water and watched as it floated away. But when the tip of a mannequin's fingers sprang out of the water and took my piece in, a shiver ran down from the top of my head to the end of my toes. Did you guys see that? Bro! Here! Johnny split his s'more in half, the gooey center stretching like fresh out of the deep fryer mozzarella sticks. My buddy Johnny and I had been friends for 4 years now, since first grade. My only friend. All the other kids sided with him always, but when I tried talking to them, they'd ignore me. Yes, I longed for more friends, and yes, I felt a little jealous of Johnny's charisma. But I knew I was lucky to have Johnny in my life. My only friend. I helped him with his schoolwork, and he got me out of trouble. Always took the blame, no matter what shenanigans we got into. And this time was no exception. He had a fake doctor's note ready for us. And if the teachers and parents found out it was fake, he'd say he'd planned it all. Sally, though, we'd just met her this year in 5th grade. The moment I laid eyes on her, my heart pounded so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. Little hearts formed around her head, just like in the cartoons. But just as quick as I'd fallen for her, she took a liking to Johnny, and they hit it off. And she often rolled her eyes at me. At the end of the pier that was yards and yards away, water splashed. I squinted to get a good look. Figured something had been thrown into the water and washed ashore, for it was usually like that. Guests came to the lake, swam, held parties. Music blasted at full volume, and instead of taking care of the lake that provided them with the best Saturday and Sunday parties and cookouts, they littered the water and the sand. Even the junkies left their pills and needles scattered their poison, which became a scavenger hunt for the other junkies and beach cleanup crew. I took a few steps away from Johnny and Sally, then turned to tell them I'd be back, that I wanted to see what was at the pier. But Johnny and Sally began to make out. They kissed, as fake as the telenovela actors my mother watched every evening from 6 to 9. And she ignored me those 3 hours. In fact, I was on my own most of the time, whether she was home or not. She either worked, watched TV, or locked herself in her bedroom. When I arrived at the pier, I made my way under the boardwalk. The clouds that had gathered darkened the underpier, but I could still make out the figures that stood still. It was like they'd met for a secret meeting, and I'd just discovered them. "Hi," my voice said, struggling to get that one word out. Not one of them minded me, but I could hear their whispers. I inched closer. Their whispers stopped. At the end of the underpier, where the water and sand met, there she was, my mannequin, my savior. I went to her, avoiding the still figures, But as I neared them, a harsh gust of wind pushed me down to the sand, close to them. "Push," I heard them whisper. "Water," they continued. My breathing increased at the thought of these lifeless models somehow communicating. I looked up at them. The figures had their heads turned to me. How? I had no clue. They had no eyes, no mouths. In fact, there was nothing on them but the head, arms, legs, and torso that made them up. Naked, motionless. And though they weren't looking at me directly, their gaze was fixed on me. I pushed myself up and walked backward, away from them, away to the light past the underpier. But before my body touched the light, one of them blocked me. It was her. I knew it. There was a connection between us. I turned to her. The arm that had stopped me remained up in the air. "Bring," they said. And I turned to them. No realizing when, she pushed me, and again, I was down. Sand kicked in my face. No idea which of them had done it, because when I looked up, they remained still. Now, they were closer. How many were they? 9, perhaps. 10, if you counted her behind me. Where was Johnny? Sally? Still making out? Friend? Forever. Us? Never leave. They had a cultish demeanor about them. When they spoke, it was chant-like, but like they were speaking to me. "Water?" she said behind me. "Lake." "What? You want me to go into the water?" "Us. Forever." Friend. Were they recruiting me? "I can't," I cried. The sand that covered my hand scratched my eyes. "My mom, she'll get worried. My friends, they'll come looking for me soon. She hate," one of them whispered. "Who? My mom? Sally?" "He lost," another one said. "Johnny." Had I lost my friend to her? We friends. The one behind me tugged at my shirt, her hand already pointed at the water. I turned to my friends. For a moment, it looked like Johnny had noticed me and locked eyes with me. Then, Sally turned his face away to hers. Whether she hated me or disliked me, what was true was that she didn't consider me her friend. She was all about Johnny. I turned to the mannequins under the pier. There were 8 now, plus she, who had saved me, still behind me. The one missing was now in the lake, its torso above the water, its arms extended, ready to receive me. "Friends forever," I whispered, foreboding. It was all too much, really. The woman and the boy dragged their tired legs through the deep snow. Ahead of them, far off in the distance, lay the undulating, snow-covered hills where the log cabin they were heading for had been built many years previously. The two could picture in their minds a blazing fire and hot chocolate with little marshmallows floating on the surface. And it was this that kept them going. The boy, a young teenager, often had to support the woman and help her across fallen trees that hampered their progress. The woman was exhausted, and every few minutes she stopped, leaning heavily over her knees, trying desperately to catch her breath. The boy stopped with her every time, but his eyes kept traveling anxiously across the vast expanse of land they had to cross to reach their goal. Being younger and fitter, he didn't need as many breaks as the woman did, but he never complained. It was more important for him to bring the woman back alive than to force her to walk faster. They set off again, the woman hanging on to the boy's arm. The surface underneath them suddenly turned slippery. They had reached the frozen lake finally. There was still a long way to go, but at least there were no hills or fallen trees to navigate. The woman stopped again. Her breathing was labored, and she had trouble drawing a deep enough breath to regain some strength. She was crying from the exhaustion. The boy knelt down and held her. His face was worried and concerned. His hands shook somewhat as he gently patted the woman's back. A man walked past in a sideways manner, like a crab. He waved at the pair and smiled. The woman stretched out a hand towards the man, imploringly, and the boy gave him a surly look. But the man just smiled again and continued through the deep snow. He wore only one snowshoe, which explained his strange gait, but it didn't seem to hamper his progress. He flattened the snow with his snowshoe-clad foot and hardly sunk through the snow at all with the other foot. The woman looked at the flattened snow and then looked up at the boy. He smiled at her. At least there would now be an easier path for them to use. The woman straightened up and, sensing renewed vigor, pulled the boy to his feet. They hugged, took each other's hand, and started walking again. Ahead of them, the man continued his crab walk, humming a monotonous tune that sounded more like a low rumble than anything else. He turned his head, saw them walking behind him, and motioned for them to follow, nodding his head encouragingly. As the man forged ahead in front of them, the distance between them and him grew. The man was walking unnaturally fast, considering the conditions and his unconventional gait, and the boy grew anxious. He tried to walk faster to keep up, and the distance between him and the woman increased unrelentingly. She called his name, but he seemed oblivious. He had his eyes firmly on the man, who was now barely visible far ahead of them, and did not stop when the woman needed a break again. She called him feebly, but she had no strength to raise her voice. She cried again, cursing her tired legs and laboring lungs. Once more, she bent over her knees, trying to catch her breath. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg the boy to wait, but no words could be heard. A flutter on the wind, a change in the vibrations another human being causes when they disturb the airflow, caused her to look up. The boy was no longer visible from her vantage point, bent double over her knees. She straightened up quickly, her heart beating faster. Where was the boy? Squinting to look in front of her, she suddenly saw his head pop up, arms flailing, and then disappear again. Her heart fell into her stomach. He had gone through the ice. Finding a strength she didn't know she had, the woman ran. The snow was deep and felt like syrup. She screamed in frustration and then called the boy's name. As she got closer, she slowed down, walking fast but carefully towards the boy. He was bobbing up and down again, waving his arms, but he made no sound. The cold water had robbed him of his voice, and his open mouth, so poignant in his horrified face, only mimicked the sound he was trying to make. Suddenly, he disappeared again, and only his hand was sticking up over the snow. The woman, no longer trying to be cautious, threw herself down on the ice and found his hand. Seconds before, it would have disappeared under the water. She felt the boy grabbing the hand, and she pulled, the adrenaline and fear giving her more strength than she had ever had before. The boy's head appeared again. He looked straight at the woman, and there was a panic in his eyes that scared her more than anything else. She noticed that there wasn't much room for his head, and with a jolt of fear, she realized the fissure in the ice was closing up, and fast. The boy's head disappeared under the water again, despite her holding on to his hand, and the hole kept closing. Now, there was no way the boy could get his head through the hole to draw breath again, and she screamed in fear and panic. With her free hand, she started pounding on the ice around the hole. The ice was too hard, and her frail beating could not even chip away at the surface. Keeping a firm hold on the hand that still gripped hers convulsively, she tried bashing a hole in the ice with the heel of one boot, but the ice would not even crack. The boy's hand started losing its grip on her hand, and she wailed in desperation, stomping harder on the ice, standing up to add weight to the pounding on the ice. She lost her grip on the boy's hand, and it slipped below the water, the hole finally closing inexorably around it with a sucking sound. Far away from the location in her dream, the woman woke up sobbing, sweat moistening her forehead and shaking from head to toe. A pain in her chest so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The woman tried taking a deep breath. She was moaning, and her heart was beating so rapidly it hurt. Next to her, her husband was snoring loudly, completely oblivious to her plight. This was nothing new. It would more than likely take an earthquake to wake him up at this hour, and she didn't need him anyway. She gently pushed the blankets aside and slipped out of bed. She had to make sure he was safe. The dream had been so vivid, so real. Tiptoeing across the hall, shivering slightly in the cold night air that permeated the house, she arrived in her older son's bedroom. A soft snoring could be heard from the room. As she neared, a quiet meow greeted her. Looking into the room, the lamp-like eyes of their cat Brandy were staring back at her, and the animal meowed quietly again. Letting her breath out, she hadn't even been aware of holding it. She tiptoed over to stroke the cat gently. "Good girl, you stay with him. Keep him safe for me." Looking down upon her teenage son, his mouth open and his wavy hair in disarray around his peaceful face, she felt her throat constrict slightly, and she had to swallow hard to stifle the moan that had almost escaped her mouth again. The dream was still so alive in her mind, and the sense of foreboding was making her eyes water, her chest aching so much she was afraid it would burst open, wanting desperately to wake him up just to hold him. She instead stretched her hand out, stroking her son's forehead gently before retreating out into the hall again. Feeling compelled to check on her younger son as well, she continued down the hall to the third bedroom. He was sleeping on top of his covers, his little thumb securely lodged in his mouth. She could tell he was cold as he was curled up in a fetal position, and she carefully tugged the blanket out from under him, covering his little body and tucking it in around the sides of the bed. There was no point in going back to bed now. She was wide awake, and in less than an hour and a half, she would have to be up to help the kids get ready for school. She tiptoed past her husband, still in his bed, snoring loudly, to grab her bathrobe, and then snuck downstairs to make a cup of tea. Sunlight was forcing its way into her kitchen when she arrived back downstairs, penetrating dusty corners and pushing through a curtain of tiny dust particles that had been stirred up as she grabbed a tea towel to wipe the cup. And she sat down at the kitchen table, carefully sipping a steaming cup of Earl Grey. She still felt cold inside, shivering slightly, even as the warm liquid made its way to her empty stomach. The image of her son's head disappearing under the ice in her dream, still so clear in her mind, it was making her shake her head repeatedly, as if to rid herself of an annoying fly. She was wringing her hands, moaning quietly every time she saw the hand disappearing under the ice in her mind's eye. Would she ever be able to forget this dream? Little tiny clicks on the kitchen floor told her that Brandy had decided to join her in the kitchen. The cat looked up at the woman as she rounded the kitchen island on her way to her food bowl, but seemed entirely intent on wanting to satisfy her hunger for food before satisfying other needs, such as attention from her human owner. And she beat her regular path right over to her food bowl without stopping. The bowl was empty, accusing feline eyes locked into hers. Brandy sat down, looked back at her bowl, and then up again at the woman. It was obvious that the cat was asking for food, but the woman, who was still feeling faint from her nightmare, seemed oblivious. A soft meow, mingled with a purr, escaped the tiny mouth as the cat stood back up again and sauntered over. Wrapping herself around the human legs, she began a relentless meowing until the woman finally surrendered and got up off her chair to feed the cat. That's when she saw it. Next to the canister where they kept the cat's food, there was a pile of unopened and unchecked mail from the day before. On the top, underneath a blue envelope, apparently sent out by Publishers Clearinghouse, she was probably about to win $5,000 a week for life, was something white. She realized that she was looking at a picture of snow, and with trepidation and horrific foreboding, she pulled the catalog out from under the envelope. It was a magazine on vacation cottages in northern Maine. Her husband had been canvassing for this vacation for months and had obviously ordered the catalog. And on the front was a picture of a rustic-looking cabin with snow drifts lapping the windows. In the background, a frozen lake could be seen. The woman caught her breath and felt her knees buckle. Next to the cabin, locking eyes with her from the picture, stood the man from her dream, smiling benignly, holding his hand out towards the cottage. In his other hand, he was holding one snowshoe. Mercifully, darkness enveloped her, and she escaped. For a while. It was all too much, really. The weight of secrets. The bar was a typical rough 1970s bar on the docks of London. It was a dark bar, cigarette smoke and stale beer in the air. A neon sign buzzed at the top of the room, casting an almost ghostly red light on the scene. It was a type of bar where secrets were told, debts were paid. A type of bar where men like Marcus knew not to linger. But tonight, he had no other options. He was seated in the last booth, facing the wall, a glass of whiskey half empty in front of him. The ice long melted, the drink as watered down as his nerves. His fingers tapped nervously against the table, and his eyes flicked to the door every few minutes. She was late. Of course she was. Claire had never done anything on time. It was a power move, a thing she had mastered when they were just kids pulling jobs together, before the messy world got messier, before trust became a precious commodity neither could afford. When she actually did walk into the room, it shrunk around her. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she had an energy that turned heads. She moved like she knew things other people didn't, like she could see the strings behind the curtain, the mechanism, and knew exactly how to pull them. She spotted him immediately, sliding into the booth across from him, a cocky little smile on her face. "I didn't actually think you'd come," Marcus muttered, taking a slow sip of his glass. Claire reclined in a cross-legged position. "You called." I was curious. That was what you could say about Claire. She didn't waste words. It was as if every sentence was measured, weighed, and heavy. Marcus rubbed his jaw, suddenly unsure how to begin. He had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his head, tortured himself with each word. But now, suddenly, all that preparation unraveled as he looked at her. "You don't belong here," he replied instead. Claire raised an eyebrow. "And yet, here I am." She motioned to his drink. "You gonna tell me why you called me out of the blue? Or are we just reminiscing?" Marcus exhaled slowly. He glanced around the bar. Nobody was watching, but that didn't mean there weren't watchers. Risked a trip out here was what he'd done. Hell, even whispering Claire's name when he did what he did was a risk. But he needed a trusted person to help, or at least not rip his head off on sight. "We got a problem. I found something," he said. "About the shipment." Claire's expression did not budge, nor her posture. Here she was, now listening, really listening. "Go on," she said. Marcus hesitated. This was the moment. The point of no return. He could always backpedal, feign some excuse, play like this was whatever. But he didn't. "The shipment is not what they say it is," he said in a low voice. "It's not weapons." Claire tilted her head slightly. "Then what is it?" Marcus swallowed. His heart was in his throat. He had already said too much. "It's not good, Claire," he had the breath to say. "Worse than anything we've ever had before." She bent forward with her elbows on the table. "Marcus," her voice a silky, low drawl, steady but brittle, she said, "What's in the shipment?" His mouth felt dry. He glanced back at the barkeep, at the old guy behind the counter with a beer, a couple huddled away in the back. That one could be eavesdropping on us. "I can't," he said finally. "I've said too much." Claire sighed. "You do this every time. Look at you," she said, shaking her head. "You first attach, and then in the next breath, you detach without explanation. If you tell me nothing, you explain to me what the hell's going on here, or you waste my time." Marcus clenched his jaw. "I'm only trying to keep you alive." Claire eyed him up and down, piercing him with her gaze. "And who says I need saving?" "You don't understand," Marcus said, stepping closer. He dropped his voice to a whisper. "This isn't just a job, Claire. This is something else. Something bigger." She didn't blink. "Then explain it to me." He hesitated again. And that's when he saw it, a man in the bar, observing them from below the brim of a dark hat. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't talking. "He's literally just sitting there waiting for us," he said. Marcus's stomach dropped. They weren't alone. He reclined in his seat, trying to remain calm. He drained the remainder of his whiskey, then resolutely put the glass up on the table. "We're leaving," he said, almost to himself. Claire didn't argue. She just looked back and spotted the gentleman and nodded. She was up and moving before he was, gliding like a shadow while he scurried toward the door. The cool night air hit them like a slap as soon as they were outside. The streets were vacant, the city throbbing with the sort of silence that can only descend when there's danger close at hand. "Well, talk," Claire said, as soon as they were out of his sight. Marcus was running a hand through his hair. Thinking. "I should not have called you," he admitted. Claire grabbed his arm, halting him. "Marcus," he was looking at her, truly looking at her, seeing something he hadn't allowed himself to see until now. This was more than just another job for her. It wasn't just any payday. She wanted answers, and she wasn't going to let him off the hook without having him give them to her. Marcus exhaled. "The shipment," he said. "It's not weapons, it's people." Claire's mask broke for the first time. "What?" "They are actually smuggling people, Claire. And not just any people." He lowered his voice. "They're selling them, like cargo." Silence. Then, "Who?" "You know the answer to that already." Claire stared at him. "You're sure?" Marcus nodded. She fell quiet for a long beat. Then, at last, she took a long breath out. "Shit," she muttered. Marcus nodded again. "Yeah." She shook her head, ran a hand through her hair. "This is bad, Marcus. This is a real shit show." "I know." Claire raised her head to look at him, a sharp, calculating look in her eyes. "What's your plan?" He hesitated. He hadn't gotten that far, but Claire had always been faster than him. "I'm able." She straightened up. "First thing we do is we disappear, you and me. Because if they know, you are dead already." Marcus swallowed. "And then what?" A smile broke across her face, an old flame bursting into life in her eyes. "And then we burn them down." And at that moment, Marcus knew it was too late to go back. He had said too much, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was what needed to be said. "They're coming. They're coming." The whispers carried by the wind, the repeat of words started yesterday morning, from the moment my bare feet touched the wooden planks of the wrapped-around porch. The corn swayed slowly. Anticipation, knowing they would soon pick up their speed. Sounds of the horses shifting around the fields, anxiety fueling them. They knew just as well as I did what was to come. The clouds in the distance were dense. The light around the house shined bright for now. The blanket of clouds would take that away. Soon, too soon. The pitter-patter of little feet sounded from behind me. A hand wrapping around my finger, giving a slight tug. Her bright blue eyes would be boring into me. Those beautiful eyes she adopted from her father. If only he was here, they wouldn't be coming. They would leave us be. They would keep their distance. They knew what the consequences were, but no contact, no letters, no information of where he was or when he would come home, left us in the foreboding shadows. The war was bound to come. Unfortunately, we knew that. The day the papers came, he looked at me. The look of knowing all too well. He would be called upon, leaving us to fend for ourselves, while he went God knows where, to defend the great land we call home. The last letter received was over a month ago now. We sent one in return within the week. Concerns the officers would come bringing devastating news filled the house, weighing the air down. Another tug released me from my trance. I looked down, mustering a smile as best I could. Guiding her back into the house, setting her up in the chair for breakfast. Eggs, toast, and fresh bacon from one of the sows lay in front of her. Coffee was the choice for me. Hunger was gone. I felt nothing of the sorts. Thirst controlled me. Coffee, water, and milk satisfied me for the time being. A bang sounded outside. My eyes snapped to see through the fogged window from grime. Something else to add to my list of things to do. The dust and dirt picking up from the fields created a layer. A goat was taking time to practice butting again, lining up to go again with one of the poles surrounding them. The clouds were closer. Too much to do before they would be here. Too little time. Another tug, this time my dress. I felt the hole in the side tear a little bit more. Another thing to fix around this place. I turned. Her shoes were on her feet, and mine were in her hands. The plate behind her was polished off, and the cup with remnants of milk sat beside it. Her head cocked to the side. A nod returned. Sliding my feet into my boots, we headed out to accomplish the never-ending tasks plaguing us. Night fell quickly, and the clouds were almost here. By morning, they would be on top of us. The sounds of the restless animals in the barn through the open window next to my bed. Creaks of the old house moving with the wind called out in various parts. The nerves, the knowing of what's coming, getting to me, all while she slept peacefully in her bed. No worries in the world, aside from making sure the animals were happy, and her father was okay. The adolescent hopes and dreams occupying her mind. Mine was screaming at me. Too many thoughts, too many fears, all flicking through, ready to explode out. The hope of tea helping the pain and pressure, all while it did nothing at all. It usually did not, but I lived by it as my mother had too. Lessons she taught me, guided me quite frequently. That being just one of them. They're coming. I shuddered with the wind as it brought that news. Constant reminders. I wanted to scream out, I know, I know all too well. Instead, I stayed quiet, fighting to go to sleep to earn some peace. Peace would not come, however. My dreams would be filled with thoughts of them coming. My husband, my child not getting everything they need. The idea of peace is just that. An idea, a hope. There was none for me. The sounds were pounding by the time my eyes opened. Light barely came through the windows. The clouds were here, and so was the shadow. My feet pounded, carrying me out onto the porch. The corn stalks now looked like they were laying down, the wind rearing its ugly face. They're coming, they're coming, they're coming. The words pounded into me. My eyes watered, dirt flying into them. I felt my way to the sink, rinsing them out as best I could. Turning, she was behind me again, head cocked to the side. Quickly fixing oatmeal, she ate while I worried. Opting to give her time off today, I set her up with her favorite things in the living room. Not before getting her dressed in her Sunday best. No hair out of place, and a bow matching her shoes. The wind howled outside. They're coming, quickly. I needed to get everything done, quickly. Forgetting my shoes, I headed to the barn, multitasking, not without dropping things. The grime now covered me, just as it did the windows. Hurry. You must hurry. Stepping out of the barn, a cloud of dust was nearing. Pounding of horseshoes coming down the way, carried with the wind, just as the words did. They're coming. Minutes. A matter of minutes. And they would be here. The dust rounded the drive at the far end of the field. My feet ran me into the house and to the bathroom. Grabbing a cloth, I wet it down and scrubbed at my flesh. The grime coming off, slowly it felt. I was running out of time. Finally, getting the last mark off, I put my Sunday best on, running my fingers through my hair. Standing in the doorway, she was beside me, watching the cloud of dust get closer. They're coming. The wind howled again. They're coming. I dreamt of heaven. There's a smell to death. And I'm not talking about the stench of rotting fat and escaping gases. It's the smell of death's presence. It changes the air molecules to make them sour. They slice your nose as you inhale, and they grate against your skin as you walk through its cloud. The effect lingers. The more bodies, the more intense it is. Like a heat map of last breaths, there wasn't a pure atom in the basement. It was suffocating. I was sitting against the wall, my dead eyes pointed to the sky, and my dropped chin pointed to Earth's core. My hands were blue, and my face was pale. My legs were twisted in such an uncomfortable way, but there was nothing I could do. Literally. I couldn't even breathe, because there was no breath to circulate, and my blood could no longer flow, because most of it was on the wall. so it seemed that I would be uncomfortable for eternity. But what's new? Even when I used to lay in the most comfortable position on a bed of clouds and fat puppies, it would only take an hour before I was forced to move again. Comfort is only a distant hope, after all, occasionally swooping down to give us a kiss on the cheek, only to fly away again. It offered a good chase, at least, but now it's gone, and it's never coming back. I can see its wings flap and flap, but its image only shrinks. Goodbye, little bird, and so my legs will stay. I don't even know who these people are next to me, beyond being an undesirable, of course. I always thought it would be my wife or children. Hell, even a neighbor in their place. But who are they? I don't know them. I've never seen them in my life, except maybe a passing glance or so. And yet, here they are. No one would ever want to imagine their coffin being shared with strangers. It's not fitting, I'll tell you that. And who pulled the trigger? I didn't recognize any of them either. When a man is put in such a position as I, isn't the smallest, most bare minimum honor you could give him is to at least let him see a familiar face before the black veil is draped. Even a simple photograph would suffice. Does their cruelty know no bounds? And what a disgusting day for it to happen. A clear, warm week ahead without a cloud on the radar. Yet they chose the only stormy day as the day. The rapping of the rain against the basement window was incredibly distracting, and all I had to do was stand still. I can't imagine the ruckus for the men with the job, but alas, it goes how it goes, just as it always does. Nothing new, nothing new. When my consciousness expired, there was a very bright light, just as you're told that you would see. It was like I was tied to the nose of a rushing train that was exiting a tunnel. I wasn't scared. I was intrigued, I suppose, but weary. It didn't seem like the light was growing as you'd expect, but it was still clear that we were bound to collide. And so we did. I then entered a still ocean, hovering over it, as if I was sitting on top of a floating rug. I looked around, and there was nothing that rose above the floor of shimmering water, completely level. I waited for some sort of figure to appear, an angel or guide, but no one came. I was alone. There was a thick white fog, more of a cream color, actually, and it was smothering everything, especially the horizon. The sky was the same color. I suppose it was more of a calm mist than a fog, if that makes sense. I stayed above the water, simply watching the mist, and I found myself entirely at peace. There was no tension or wonder. It felt right, natural, ethereal. Then the day succumbed to a wicked night. Everything was dark, and ugly. But something in me knew everything was there, just as it was earlier. The water danced in an invisible moonlight, and due to the darkness, it was no longer water, but an eerie liquid. For the first time, I became aware of the possibility that the liquid might touch me, and it was terrifying. I couldn't say why. It's the same experience as seeing a familiar item in your bedroom turn into a demon when the lights go off. You know what it is and what it isn't, but you have nothing to prove it. And so, it was a demon. I found myself on the run again, but the reins were still out of my control. I soared through the dark mist to a sort of cave with a light echoing from its depths. Yet this light was only an illuminance in its vibrancy and not color. It was blacker than anything else in sight. You could shine the most intense beam of real-world light into the cave's exhaust, and the darkness would devour every ounce of it. There was no overshadowing its power. I was slurped into this cave like blood down a drain. And when I woke, I was surrounded by 4 things. They were human in their shape and size, but their faces and direct appearance were revolting. Like bloody brain matter paired with the sensation of swallowing a razor blade. It's impossible to convey their grotesqueness, and they were in pain. They were suffering, whatever they were. I was lying flat on the cave floor, looking at them, all standing over me. They were studying me in teary-eyed horror. Just as I studied them, they were afraid and sad and grossed out. I was a brutal crime scene, and they were an innocent child. Their spirits yearned for an opportunity of hesitation, while their bodies functioned autonomously. They lifted me up like I was in a stretcher. Then they carried me through the cave, mostly keeping their vision to their path of travel, but occasionally sneaking a glance against their will at whatever I was to them. They placed me on a cold table and backed off, fighting themselves to sever the tie between their eyes and me. Then they were gone. All I could see was a wet cave ceiling. I knew a figure was next to me. I closed my eyes. It rolled its feet as it moved along my left side, doing seemingly nothing other than being present and busy. I don't know if it wanted me to open my eyes. It dared me to, but I would never. The ringing of complete silence was giving me the feeling of a terrible migraine. I couldn't relax because the figure was there, so I stayed alert and ready, as if there were some sort of instructions to be heard or questions to be asked. But there were none. No sound, no feel, only dread. Something was coming. Something was going to happen. It was racing to me. But there was nothing outside of the expectation of it to tell me. The figure paced. I didn't know what the figure looked like, and I would never dare to satisfy that curiosity. It wanted me to see it so that it could punish me. Like a bully hovering in your peripheral vision, waiting for you to make eye contact so it could warrant abuse. But the figure, what abuse was in its arsenal? I was inflating with the shivers of dread, the heat of its vibrations cooking me like a bowl of popcorn. The figure was by my feet, my unprotected, naked feet. It wasn't doing anything yet, but of course, it was getting ready for something. Something big. I never realized how soft and sensitive the skin on my feet was until then. I expected the Lord to be here, but he wasn't. What are the rules if the rules I lived by didn't work? I don't even know if I had skin or a body or anything other than my perception. I would never open my eyes to see. If my skin was still attached, it must have shaken itself loose by now. Trembles of this magnitude would bring down even the strongest city. It's on my right side now. What's it doing there? Why there? My left side is empty, exposed, naked. There's fidgeting behind me. Metallic clinking, shuffling. But it's delicate and gentle. There's no rush to it, like an assassin taking his time to thread on a suppressor. His mind is in the clouds, and his hand is on the gun. How could one smile in a time such as that? The figure isn't smiling, though, I'm sure. It's all business for it, nothing more. A freezing chill tickles my scalp, near where the figure is hovering. What is it doing? Wait. It left. There's no door to close, but some sort of barrier is now between it and me. It's gone, but I can still feel it moving through the cave, as if I have a map of its layout. I'm alone. My eyes will stay shut. I've decided it. I'm not risking it. Not for anything. It'll come back. The figure, it'll come back without a doubt. It's getting something for me. I know it. But what? Or is that it? Is it done? Or will there be more? Has it even started yet? What is it? I don't know anything, but I know enough to not be ignorant. There's something coming. It's on its way. But why am I here? What is here? Does everyone go here? Oh, it's back. The figure is back. Unexpected. Turbulence. I catch myself staring into the bright blue space of nothingness as I instinctively prepare another cup of tea. Balancing myself with a wide stance, the tea swoops up around the cup, teasing a spill, as I manage to place it down for the woman in 12D. Her legs stretch out in front of her as she makes the most of the emergency exit row. I move down the next few rows, filling plastic cups with water and stale coffee. My mind is once again invaded with their final words to me. You're just asking for it, now being another glorified air waitress. What are you doing tonight, Soph? Krista asks, rearranging her white blouse and smoothing down her skirt as I start packing down the drinks cart. Just the usual, I guess. Wow, look at you spicing things up. She mocks, adjusting the pink scarf around her neck with perfectly manicured hands. The usual means I will be performing the same overnight trip routine of gym, jog around the city, order in cheap hotel food, and read a book. I once defied my better judgment and went out with Krista, but ended up having a panic attack in the bathroom. One of the guys at the bar had slipped an arm around my waist, and the touch of a stranger set off every warning sign in my body. I opted to get the next round of margaritas after pulling myself together, and my head didn't hit the hotel pillow until 3 a.m. before my alarm woke me up an hour later. The sunlight at this altitude is unforgiving on hungover eyes. So who are you planning on staying up with all night? I tease. Okay, so you remember how I told you about Matt? I hardly remember any of her friends' names, but I nod anyway. So he's in town and has invited over a couple of his friends from work. We are going to start at Gin Palace. You remember that cute place, right? Hidden door in the alleyway, a few lanes down from the hotel, bookcases on the wall, house music, and those huge wine glasses I like, but with all different types of fancy gin and tonics. With my back to her, as I stow away the trolley, I realize she's waiting for my confirmation. Oh yeah, I remember. Nice place. Unbothered by my obvious lack of interest, she continues. Anyway, we are starting there, and then we're trying a new spot nearby. Apparently, one of his friends knows a club that is all completely glow in the dark. And she's cut off by the sound of the seatbelt light turning on as the captain announces we are likely to experience turbulence. Our cabin manager signals us to make our way down the aisle to ensure everyone follows the instructions, stopping to help a mother of 2 buckle up her sticky-looking toddlers. I think about Krista and how she is so open to new experiences and people. I can already imagine how her night is going to go. She will greet her friends with a big smile, and they'll cheers to having a fun night ahead. They'll share laughs, gossip, travel experiences, and talk like they've known each other for years. She has that effect on people, myself included. A commotion seems to be happening down the back of the plane, but it doesn't sound unusual. It's probably another disgruntled passenger complaining about being restrained by the seatbelt sign. Sounds like another safety rebellion happening. I joke quietly as I meet Krista in the center of the cabin. Actually, it's some fancy businessman with an accent complaining he was assigned the wrong seat. She rolls her eyes. I think he's European, but not the sexy, swoony kind. My stomach drops from the mention of an accented businessman. I swallow the wave of anxiety and force a sarcastic smile. If only more swoony European tourists came here for holidays, hey? Well, I wouldn't be hanging out with Matt and his friends tonight. I'll tell you that. She quips, We're about 30 minutes from touchdown and about to prepare the cabin for landing. It has been a relatively easy flight. Everyone in my section seems content, and the disgruntled man appears to have quietened down. Our cabin manager approaches Krista and I. She asks us to continue scanning the rows further down while she checks in with the captain. The turbulence is almost unnoticeable as I walk toward the back of the plane, but I sense a few nervous flyers and reassure them it's okay. We're not far from our destination. Then I see him sitting in the aisle seat, second row from the back. Cold gray eyes stare right through me. His mouth curls into a tight, malicious grin. A sudden drop of the aircraft challenges my balance, and I grab onto the nearest headrest to steady myself. Apologizing to no one in particular, I turn around in disbelief. Looking over my shoulder, I check if it's just a cruel trick of my subconscious. The seat is empty. Terror begins to smother my body, and I feel my hands tremble. His face has haunted me before. I've seen him in train stations, in busy restaurants, and on crowded flights like today. I'm almost used to his memory penetrating my reality. I remind myself again that it won't be real, and my mind is playing tricks. A few confused faces bring me back, and I straighten up before retreating to the front of the plane. Pulling the curtain across behind me, I start to feel my throat close up. It's not real. He's not here. I was just imagining it. My hand is gripping my chest, as if to stop my heart from bursting out of me. The lavatory door is opened, then locked on the other side of the thin material, separating the passengers, oblivious to my silent distress. Calming my breaths to a steadier rhythm, I squeeze my elbows onto the small bench space in front of me and let my head fall into my hands. I sense I am no longer alone. The uniform suits you. Now I'm hearing things. My insides turn, and I feel vomit fighting its way up. You don't have to be shy. I know it's been a while. His words are thick with Syra, and an accent I haven't heard in over a year. My nose twitches as his cologne inches closer, infiltrating my airways with unbearable familiarity. Definitely real. I've missed you, he says casually, as if we are two old friends. I desperately will for Krista or another attendant to interrupt the reunion, but I remain compromised. He's dangerous. I know this. A plane full of bystanders and a small crew of staff. What is he willing to risk? Before I am able to answer my own thoughts, I feel a cool touch to my lower back, and I stiffen. The hairs on my neck snap out like razor blades, and my blood turns to ice. Why won't you look at me, my dear? As his hand slides further up my back, I'm screaming for help, but no sound is leaving my mouth. I'm launching my knee into his ribs, but my legs are stuck in place. I'm reaching for the intercom, but my hands are locked together on my chest. A jolt knocks us both off our balance, and I'm able to swing out of his touch, only to find us face to face. He's shorter than I remember. Silver flecks scatter the sides of his thinning hair. He's even uglier than I remember. "Sir, you can't be back here." Krista drifts past the curtain and pauses in between us. "Get back to your seat now, please." "Of course, my dear." Pausing to smirk before he exits. "Are you okay? You look like you've just seen a dead body." Krista's face is filled with concern. I bite my tongue before responding with, "I wish I had," and let her know I'm fine, just a little shaken from the bumpy ride. "Oh, really? I can hardly feel a thing." She moves over to the CID's system and sets the lavatory lights to red. We'll be descending soon. I straighten up my blouse and pat under my eyes to make sure any signs of horror are blurred into my smooth, professional mask. "So did Mr. Fancy Pants think he'd find his seat up here?" "What?" I can hardly hear her over the ringing in my eardrums. "The European guy with the accent. Was he pestering you about his seat?" "Oh." I force an eye roll. "He just came too far up looking for the bathroom." "Well, you'd think he's a regular flyer with that attitude. Wouldn't he know where the lavatories are on these planes by now?" I shrug and move past her, pretending to be busy conducting final checks on the food and beverage lockers. Krista announces the instructions for our descent across the cabin intercom, then turns to me. "I'm just going to do a final rubbish collection and seat check. You want to just wait here? You look a little pale." "Yeah, if you don't mind." "Thanks." I move to open up the jump seat and begin to strap myself in. "Damn," I mutter. I forgot to pull back the curtain. My hands are still shaky from the monster behind it. I begin to release the seat belt and stand up, taking a deep breath in before I reach up for a handful of fabric. But a hand grabs mine first. My weight is suddenly whipped out from underneath me, and I'm falling. A wicked crack erupts from behind my ears. I can feel something warm and wet trickle down my back. "You thought you could run away, and I would forget about you?" He's hovering over me. Did anyone hear me fall? Bringing his slimy fingers to my face, he strokes my cheek. Paralyzed. I'm trying to run in a bad dream, but my legs won't move faster than a walk. I'm being chased, but my body has no sense of urgency. My mind is fighting to control a faulty vessel. His hand on my thigh makes me feel 18. "Oh my God!" I hear someone shriek. She fell. I was just checking on her. "Sophie, are you okay? What happened?" Krista bends down next to him, and I struggle to focus on which one of her swirling faces is real. I want to tell her to call for an emergency, but I can't seem to gather the words. She's an old friend. I can keep an eye on her if you get a first aid kit, he says, maintaining his cool composure next to me. Looking directly at him, she says, "Sir, you need to leave right now." Before she can say more, he thrusts his hand around her throat, and she is backed against the jump seat I was sitting on just a minute before. Awful screeches escape from her mouth as the veins grow by her temples. Her eyes search desperately. Watching my friend struggle for her life suddenly releases all the tightly wound ropes, holding me anchored to the floor. My hand reaches for the nearest cupboard, and a coffee pot extends from my arm and cracks down on his skull. I hit him again and again and again. "Soph," she croaks. "Sophie," Krista pleads, struggling to pull herself up from the ground. He is silent, snapping back to my sense of self. I realize what I've done. The coffee pot drops from my hand, and a few wet drops slide off my face with it. "We need a doctor. Is anyone a doctor?" I yell, and hear the gasps echo down the aircraft. I was fresh out of high school and approaching my move-out date assigned by my parents when I started working. It was said to be the best restaurant in town. We had regular guests from all over the world who stayed in the hotel above. I didn't notice it at first, how I was always rostered on the section of mostly dinner for once. I received generous tips and learned about the different places they were all from. I enjoyed being praised for my efforts and attentiveness during the meal. The mostly male and outspoken staff generally left me alone, which suited me just fine. Though occasionally they'd comment on my appearance, telling me I needed more makeup if I had tired eyes or to put on a smile when I was clearing tables. The manager would joke about my tight ass and even grabbed it once to check the merchandise in front of the kitchen crew. Mr. Ackerman would arrive every night at 5 p.m. and order a glass of Syrah when he was in town. He'd sink into the couch at the bar and chat to the staff about life in Europe and his work in the oil business. I caught his eyes scanning my movements a few times, but we didn't speak until I was placing the napkin at his table and asking, "The usual again, sir? Make sure you take good care of him." I was frequently reminded by my manager, Colin. At the mandatory Christmas work party, we had dinner at a local pub, and Colin insisted we joined him for drinks after. Once a girl refused these nights out drinking, and she shortly had her hours cut and tips reduced until she had no choice but to quit. At the bar, we ran into some of our regulars. Mr. Ackerman seemed pleased to see us and eyed my black dress thoroughly before delivering a sharp wink. "You should go chat with him. Keep up the good service, you know," my manager instructed with a pat on the ass, a glass of wine in hand. Courtesy of the man next to me, I sat there, struggling to answer the questions over the blasting music. I noticed how misplaced Mr. Ackerman was in his business casual attire, surrounded by partying patrons, 10 or 20 years his junior. "Sorry, I didn't hear you." I leaned into his side ever so slightly, struggling to keep any distance between us. His hand slid around my thigh in response. "I'll miss seeing you when I go back home." "I'm sure you'll be fine." There were flowers in my locker the following week, and a note saying he looked forward to seeing me again. I tried talking to Colin about how it made me uncomfortable and thought it was unprofessional. Sophie, this is professional. You're making connections and bringing in regular money. Keep up the excellent work. He checked in a month later and greeted me with 3 kisses on the cheek during a busy service. I wanted to run. I wanted to wash his touch off in a scorching shower. Instead, I smiled and continued serving overpriced glasses of champagne. Then came dinner. Colin called me before my shift, asking me to wear the same black dress from the Christmas party. It's a formal kind of occasion tonight. We need to be on an extra level. Too afraid to disobey, I reluctantly arrived with black kitten heels to match, only to find I was to be served that night instead of serving. Promised my pay as usual, plus a tip from the foreign businessman, I followed orders. We sat at the candlelit table and discussed his travels and work in the private dining room. I actively avoided any conversation directed back to me. A package with a silver bow was placed between us when the plates were cleared. For you, my dear. I carefully unwrapped it to find an expensive-looking perfume. Only the best for my favorite girl. I don't know what to say. Forcing a smile, which ached my entire face. Say nothing, he whispered, pulling my hand toward him before placing his lips on my skin. I resisted every urge to whip it away and smack his jaw, but I felt another pair of eyes on me. I glanced over to the room door to find my manager peering in, nodding in approval. Everyone knew. They all played a part in it. They helped print letters, deliver flowers, and even gave him my phone number. I was a pawn in their game. Mr. Ackerman must have offered more money than I could have imagined to the entire hotel staff. What other motive did they have? Or was it just a funny joke to them? What followed in the months after will stay with me for the rest of my life. I eventually cracked the morning after being requested to join Mr. Ackerman in his room for the night. I burst through the lobby and headed straight to the manager's office. I'd saved enough of my generous tips to book a flight to the other side of the world with an approved visa and an interview with an airline. I could finally escape. Colin laughed in disbelief of my resignation and career change. You're just asking for it, now being another glorified air waitress. I dropped my apron on his desk and left without another word, going over the interaction in my head, making sure I didn't let it slip where the airline was based. The thud of the wheels touching down sends excruciating pain up my scalp as I continue applying pressure to my wound. Krista is sitting opposite me, with her face slowly returning to color, squeezing my hand. The emergency services are waiting at the gate, and I brace myself for the chaos about to erupt when we open the doors. I don't know what is going to happen. All I know is that my chest feels lighter, and I can breathe again. I've said too much. I noticed him the first time at the coffee shop on 3rd Street. He sat 2 tables over, stirring a cup of tea he never drank. He wasn't looking at me, not directly, but there was something in the way his head tilted, the way his eyes flickered over the rim of his cup, that made me feel observed. Every so often, he would blow on his mug, and eventually, this act became unsettling, as I knew the tea must have grown cold in the hour he sat unmoving. This man was dressed neatly, a stark contrast to myself, in a worn sweatshirt and messy bun that couldn't contain my red hair. He wore an ironed shirt, pressed pants, and his copper hair was immaculately combed and styled. He was remarkable because he simply did not belong. A bustling place with people moving in and out as he sat stoically with his tea. The second time was at the bookstore downtown. I was running my fingers along the shelves, searching for something to pull me in. Recently, I've been drawn to the paranormal and had moved into horror. It was terrifying, yet intriguing, as I began to imagine all there is out there that is unknown. As I perused the back of the latest Awad novel, I saw him standing in the philosophy aisle to my right. He wasn't reading, just tracing the spine of a book with one long finger. When I walked past, he looked up. "Not your usual genre," he said, nodding toward the horror novel in my hands. I frowned. "Excuse me?" He tilted his head. "You usually read literary fiction, something with layered metaphors, quiet heartbreak." A shiver danced down my spine. "How would you know that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he closed the book he had been holding and walked away, disappearing behind the towering shelves before I could press further. As I followed him, his pace quickened, dressed in seemingly the exact same clothes as days before, with a steady, strong step. I could not place him, though it felt like I knew him from somewhere. In my haste, without noticing, I had run into a display. As the books scattered to the floor, I muttered apologies to the staff member who ran over. I quickly looked up, and he was gone. By the third time, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I was at the park, spring in the air, though Lake Michigan was still hedged in ice dunes, which rose and fell in the evening light, my breath curling in front of me in soft clouds. He was sitting on a bench, his posture relaxed, hands resting in his lap. Unlike before, he didn't pretend not to notice me. I noticed he wore a scarf. A scarf, I swear, was my own. I had lost it many years ago, in grade school, and was scolded for my carelessness. It couldn't be, I thought, as I approached closer. His gaze lifted as I approached, as if he had been waiting. "You always take this route home." I stopped in my tracks. "What?" He smiled, but it wasn't a casual, friendly expression. It was something else, something knowing. The same path, every evening. "You like the way the light hits the water at this hour." My pulse quickened. "Are you following me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, He gestured to the lake. There's something peaceful about watching things move where they aren't meant to be. The way ripples distort reflections. Everything familiar becomes something else. I crossed my arms. That doesn't answer my question. He exhaled, running a hand through his auburn hair. No, I suppose it doesn't. My skin prickled. Who are you? For a moment, I thought he might tell me. He parted his lips as if considering it. His gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a strange, twisting sensation through my stomach. But then, just as quickly, something shifted. His face, his expression. It was like watching a shadow pass over the sun. I've said too much, he murmured, more to himself than to me. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his coat. Forget this conversation. My heart pounded. Forget it? He nodded, his voice quiet. It's better that way. And then he turned, walking away with an unsettling hum. I wanted to call out, to demand answers, but my throat tightened. I could only watch as he disappeared into the trees on the shoreline, his silhouette dissolving in the twilight. It wasn't until I turned back toward the path, heart hammering, that I realized something strange. There were no footprints where he had been standing, and the air where he had spoken still carried the scent of something I couldn't quite name. Something like old paper, burnt cedar, and a storm about to break. I don't remember deciding to come here. One moment, I was standing in the park. The next, the ice stretched before me, endless and waiting. I had begun to question whether I was losing my grip on reality. The strange man's cryptic words, the shifting moments in time, and the absence of solid ground beneath my feet had all led me to this moment, standing on the frozen shore of Lake Michigan. The ice cracked beneath my boots, protesting against the weight of yet another cold season. The lake stretched out before me, an endless horizon of white and blue that should have felt serene, but instead left me with an unsettling feeling, like something was wrong, something lurking just out of sight. I walked carefully, mindful of the shifting terrain beneath me. The lake was beautiful, but treacherous. Mounds of frozen sand rose in strange, wind-carved shapes, dusted with snow. The ice here was patchy, some parts solid, some beginning to crack and leak dark pools of water beneath. There was something about this place that made my stomach turn, something about the way the lake seemed to pulse under my feet. It felt alive, watching me, waiting. The icy wind bit at my skin, and my breath curled in the air in front of me in wisps of smoke. I knelt by a pool of dark water that had opened beneath the ice, watching as minnows darted below, their silver bodies flashing like tiny ghosts in the clear, cold depths. The clarity of the water made my pulse quicken. Too easy to see the darkness below. Too easy to imagine the lake's cold hunger. Then, something caught my eye, a darker patch of ice than the others. An odd shape trapped beneath the surface. I moved closer, my boots skidding slightly on the slick ground. The ice here was different, smoother, clearer, almost like glass. And underneath it, something unnatural. A smear of color, a reddish-orange streak that seemed impossibly bright against the deep blue-black of the water. My heart lurched. I knelt down, tapping gently at the ice with the toe of my boot, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shape underneath wavered, but it didn't move. I pressed harder, cracking the ice, and then, as though the surface were giving up its secret, the water pooled, revealing what had been hidden beneath. Hair, long and dark, flowing like seaweed with the current. A face, pale and lifeless, staring upward, eyes wide and empty. My breath caught. A sharp, cold terror raced through my veins. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't look away. The wind howled, and the ice beneath me groaned, shifting uneasily. And then realization struck like a physical blow. The woman under the ice, frozen, lifeless, was me. A strangled sound left my throat. My mind recoiled, trying to reject what I was seeing. But there was no denying it. It was my own face staring back at me, my own vacant, sightless eyes, trapped beneath the ice. A whisper cut through the howling wind. "Do you understand now?" I turned sharply. The man was there, standing just a few feet behind me, as if he had always been. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes, an ancient sorrow, a knowing, made my stomach churn. "You weren't meant to find this," he said quietly, his gaze flickering to the ice, to the frozen image of me. I shook my head, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What is this? Why is she? Why am I?" "You've been lost," he said softly. "Lost in time, lost in memory. The past and future bleed together. You are the woman under the ice, and yet you're still here, trying to find your way." A deep, pulsing ache settled in my chest. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I wanted to reject his words, to turn and run, but something about them rang true in a way I couldn't explain. I opened my mouth to speak, but something flickered in my peripheral vision. Movement in the ice. I turned sharply, expecting to see the body beneath me shift. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. Reflections. Not just one, but many, scattered across the ice in broken, distorted fragments. My face, but not as it was now. Older, younger, crying. laughing, standing somewhere else entirely, flickering like a glitch in time. 100 versions of me trapped beneath the surface, shifting and blending like ripples in the water. One version of me didn't flicker and vanish like the others. She was staring back, her mouth moving soundlessly, like she was trying to warn me. My hands trembled. "This isn't real," the man sighed, as if he had been expecting this reaction. "What is real?" he murmured. "Is time so linear, Alex? Can you really be sure you're still the same person you think you are? Or have you already crossed over?" My pulse slammed against my ribs. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong. But something inside me knew he wasn't. The lake groaned beneath me, the ice fracturing in slow, creeping lines. The world tilted, unsteady, and for a moment, I felt as though I was slipping between the cracks, the space between past and future collapsing around me. I turned back to the man, searching his face for some kind of anchor, some kind of answer. "What do I do?" I whispered. His eyes were solemn, unwavering. "You come with me. There's only one way to move forward." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I hesitated, my gaze flickering once more to the frozen version of myself beneath the ice. A life lost, a path already taken. But if I stepped away, if I turned back now, would I ever get another chance to change it? I swallowed hard. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. And then I nodded. The man held out his hand, and I took it. What she left behind. California, 1868. Clara Emerson pressed herself against the train window, her eyes glazed and alert from exhaustion. She stretched out her aching legs, revealing her muddy shoes that poked out from underneath the hem of her dress. She retracted her feet back from visibility, gathering and stroking her straw-like, graying hair as she peered out the window. Clara glanced to see if anyone was watching her. Only a handful of people sat behind her, none of which were looking in her direction. "No, I'm safe." She drew in a deep breath, steadying herself. But unease coiled in her chest and churned in her belly. Turning in her seat, she lowered her gaze to the small diamond band on her finger. Sunlight caught in its facets, scattering tiny prisms across her skin. For just a moment, she marveled at its beauty. Clara looked up and locked eyes with a man several seats ahead, clean-shaven, with thin-framed spectacles perched on his nose. The man stared at her with a hollow, unreadable expression. Her pulse kicked. How long had he been watching her without her noticing? Her skin went raw and clammy, like a predator spotting easy prey. The man rose from his seat and approached her, not breaking eye contact once. Clara's stiffened in her seat as the man approached. "Go away. May I sit? I have a long journey ahead of me, and I could sure use the company," he said to her. "No." Of course, the man sat down across from her. His eyes remained on her, almost as if they were boring into her very soul. "Didn't anyone tell you it's rude to stare?" she asked him, hoping that illuminating his behavior would cause him to cease. But it did not. "Forgive me, ma'am. It's just, you look so familiar. Do we know each other, perhaps?" "No, I don't recall your face. You must be mistaken." "No, I think we do know each other." "Why won't he quit?" "Where are you from?" "I'm not going to tell you that. You haven't even told me who you are." "Ah, how foolish of me. My name is Simon Klein." He leaned forward, extending his hand to her. He sat back down and continued to stare at her, expectantly this time. Clara sighed, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "I'm Elaine. Elaine Whitmore. Elaine. I would have taken you for an Alice or Charlotte or Clara." Clara froze in her seat, her eyes wide and her palms sweaty. "Who is this man?" "No, I'm just Elaine." Mr. Klein gave her a wry smile, shaking his head. "So, where are you headed to?" Clara shrugged. "Anywhere that's far away from here." "Ah, come on. California's the place to be. There's opportunity here." "Not for me. Not anymore." "Shame," he said. "What is?" Mr. Klein chuckled. "Surely you have friends or family that will miss you. It almost sounds like you're running away." Now he was just getting on her nerves. "You're quite brazen, Mr. Klein. My business is none of your concern." Mr. Klein pressed his lips tightly together, as if he were in pain, and forced out a smile. "My apologies, Mrs. Whitmore. I never quite learned how to keep my nose out of others' affairs. I am a curious fellow, curious indeed." Hoping to break the tension, she pulled out a flask from underneath her shawl. "Care for a drink?" A wild glimmer in his eyes appeared. It was as if he wanted to reach out and strangle her. "No, thank you," he said, his demeanor shifting. There was something dangerous underneath this man's calm exterior. Somehow, that made him more terrifying. If he were angry and violent from the start of their encounter, she could predict his next move and accept that she was under attack. But this man unnerved her to her core. There was something almost familiar about him. Gathering her shawl, she stood from her seat, and as steady as she could present herself to be, she faced him. "I think I would prefer to be in my own company for the rest of the journey. Good day to you. Please, there's no need to leave. If you wish to be alone, I can accommodate." Mr. Klein stood, moving back to his original seat. Clara returned to hers, facing away from Mr. Klein this time. But she could still feel his eyes on her. She waited until the train had passed a dilapidated old shack close to the tracks before rising from her seat and creeping her way down toward the caboose. Her heart quickened, as did her pace. "Excuse me, sir," she heard behind her. Sucking in a breath, she chanced a glance behind her, locking eyes with Mr. Klein, who was trailing close behind her. He did not smile this time at her. His eyes were cold and focused on her intently, like before. But there was a rage in those eyes, a bloodlust, in fact. She didn't think twice this time, turning and running down the aisle like a mad woman. She stumbled through the empty train carts, praying an escape plan would present itself to her before he reached her. But there wasn't enough time, and there was nowhere left to run. "I'm trapped." She looked out the back window and considered the tracks. Maybe she could jump. Maybe. She might still have a chance. The door behind Clara creaked open. She spun around to see Mr. Klein reaching into his coat pocket, revealing a silver pistol. She backed away slowly, keeping her eyes trained on Mr. Klein, if that even was his name, and she pressed herself against the back door of the caboose. He pointed the barrel at her. Rage oozed out from beneath the calm, collected persona he performed earlier. His hand trembled, but he remained in control of himself for the moment. Clara trembled, terrified of what he would do to her. "What do you want from me? Why are you following me?" "I saw you," Mr. Klein said. "I saw what you did to my sister that night." Whatever she planned on saying to him, the words fell empty in her mouth. "This is it. It's over." "What? You thought no one saw you sneak out of her house in the dead of night? And I find my sister dead in her home? No, that's a lie. I would never harm anyone. I'm a good woman." "How do you sleep at night?" he said, his finger twitchy on the trigger. "I know it was you who did it. No sooner had I returned from my hunting trip, I see you sneaking out of her house like some rat. She was dead when I found her. Please, have mercy on me. I would never do such a thing. Liar." Mr. Klein drew closer. She fumbled for the handle behind her, desperate for escape. Her weight against the door caused it to swing open, landing her on her back. She held her hands over her head to shield herself. "Why?" he cried. "Why did you do it? Tell me!" A shrill, raspy whistle emanated from the front of the train, distracting Mr. Klein for the briefest moment. Clara seized the opportunity and kicked Mr. Klein in the shin, dropping him to his knees. He screamed, clutching his leg as the gun clattered next to him. Without a second thought, she scrambled for the pistol and swiped it, aiming the barrel at him. "Get up," she said. Mr. Klein held his hands up, pushing himself up off the floor. "I'm not the one that deserves this. I'm not going to die today." She pressed her finger to the trigger, but it wouldn't budge. The hammer. Mr. Klein grabbed hold of the barrel and yanked it back hard. Too hard. Clara released the pistol, and with it, Mr. Klein, screaming as he staggered backward, tumbling off the train. He hit the tracks hard, rolling like a rag doll, before coming to rest, bloodied and limp, his lifeless eyes fixed toward the sky. The wind violently whipped Clara's hair as Mr. Klein's body disappeared beyond view. She steadied herself against the railing, her thumb absent-mindedly tracing the curve of the diamond, lost in a thought she refused to finish. In the silence of ashes, Jacob's fingers trembled against the dented tin cup, water sloshing perilously close to the rim. The November air carved his lungs raw, bitter with smoke from chimneys that transformed flesh to ash. His worn shoes navigated the mud between barracks, sidestepping puddles that mirrored a colorless sky. At 13, Jacob had perfected invisibility. 3 years of silence, not by choice, but necessity after witnessing his father's execution, had rendered him a ghost among the living dead that shuffled through the camp. While other boys his age had been selected for immediate disposal, Jacob's muteness had ironically preserved him. The guards found utility in a servant who could never repeat their secrets, who existed in the peripheral shadows of their consciousness. The SS officers spoke freely in his presence. Plans whispered, transports scheduled, executions ordered, all captured in the flawless vault of Jacob's mind, where every detail existed in perfect recall, a gift that had once earned him praise from teachers in another lifetime, before yellow stars and cattle cars. Obersturmführer Kruger waited in his usual spot, a folding chair positioned in the sliver of shade beside Barracks 7. Jacob knew the man's habits with precision. The hat removal, 17 minutes into his shift. The triple tap of his boot before sitting. The heavy eyes, exactly 40 minutes after lunch. "Schneller, Junge!" Kruger barked, gesturing impatiently as Jacob approached. Jacob quickened his pace, keeping his eyes fixed on the shallow pool of water in the cup. One did not look directly at the gods of this underworld, the men who decided, with casual flicks of their fingers, who would breathe another day and who would feed the insatiable furnaces. Kruger snatched the cup, gulping noisily. Water escaped his lips, tracking through the dust on his chin. Jacob stood motionless, hands clasped before him, awaiting dismissal or further orders. The guard's eyes were bloodshot, the whites yellowed like old paper. Night duty in the processing center, Jacob surmised. New transports had arrived yesterday, which always meant sleepless shifts for the guards. "Wait," Kruger muttered, settling deeper into his chair. "I might want more." Jacob nodded once, the barest acknowledgement of the command. He knew stillness, as others knew prayer. A ritual of survival, practiced until it became reflex. The camp existed in constant motion, guards shouting, prisoners shuffling, machine guns occasionally stuttering their terrible poetry of death. To be still was to disappear. Minutes stretched. Kruger's head gradually lolled forward, his breathing deepening. The cup tilted dangerously in his loosening grip. Jacob watched through lowered lashes as the guard surrendered to sleep. The keys hanging from Kruger's belt caught the weak sunlight, transforming ordinary metal into something mythic. Freedom incarnate. Jacob's pulse accelerated, blood rushing in his ears like distant artillery. No guard ever slept on duty. The punishment was severe. Perhaps not death, but certainly disgrace. This aberration might never repeat itself. A singular crack in the impenetrable wall of captivity. Jacob's mind calculated with the precision of mathematics. 4 minutes until the patrol passed the northern fence. 7 minutes until roll call at the women's barracks would divert attention eastward. The electric generator hummed 60 meters to the west, powering the final barrier between imprisonment and possibility. His fingers, trained by years of obedience, trembled with rebellion as they reached toward the key ring. A lifetime compressed into a single breath as metal brushed against metal with the whisper of butterfly wings. The ring slid free. Jacob backed away silently, the keys clutched against his chest like a talisman. The dormant power they represented sent electric currents through his body, awakening nerves long numbed by survival. For the first time in 3 years, a ghost became solid. A shadow contemplated substance. A boy allowed himself to remember the concept of hope. The keys felt impossibly heavy in Jacob's pocket as he slipped between the skeletal shadows of barracks. His mind projected every detail of the camp upon the canvas of his consciousness. A perfect map etched by thousands of forced errands. There, the blind spot behind the infirmary, where guards rarely patrolled. Here, the drainage ditch that ran beneath the eastern fence, partially obscured by withered weeds. Each movement demanded precision as afternoon shadows stretched across the packed earth. Jacob became one with them. Another darkness moving among darkness, his emaciated form barely disturbing the air. The camp's architecture revealed itself differently now. What had been a prison became a puzzle box, and Jacob held the solution in his trembling hand. 327 steps to the generator shed, a left turn at the kitchens, skirt the infirmary, avoid the dogs kenneled near the northern guard tower. Gunther, the shepherd with the white spot on his muzzle, raised his head as Jacob passed downwind. The animal's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Jacob froze, becoming stone. The dog's amber eyes held his for an eternal moment before dismissing him. Just another walking skeleton, carrying neither food nor threat. Jacob released the breath he'd been holding and continued his careful trajectory toward freedom. The world had shrunk to immediate sensations. Ribs against lungs, the metallic taste of fear, fabric against skin. Nothing existed beyond this moment of movement, this singular pursuit of escape. A sudden commotion erupted near the eastern fence. Jacob pressed himself against Barracks 12, becoming one with its weathered planks as two guards rushed past. Not for him, not yet. The keys remained undiscovered. As the guards disappeared, Jacob continued his journey through the camp's service areas, places where a silent child became as invisible as dust motes in sunlight. He reached the narrow passage between buildings where mud gave way to gravel, treacherous ground that might announce his presence. Jacob moved with the deliberate care of a tightrope walker, testing each step. A soft sound stopped him. A whimper, barely audible, drifting from beneath the elevated supply depot. Jacob hesitated, freedom calling from just beyond. The sensible choice was clear. Continue, escape, survive. Yet he found himself crouching, peering into the darkness beneath the structure. 5 pairs of eyes reflected the meager light. Children, younger than himself, huddled together like rabbits in a warren. Their gaunt faces registered shock at his discovery. One boy raised a finger to cracked lips, pleading for silence that Jacob had mastered years ago. They had escaped a selection. That much was obvious. Children deemed too small for work were immediate candidates for the chambers. These 5 had somehow slipped away, hiding in this temporary sanctuary, while death searched elsewhere. Jacob knew their fate was sealed. The hiding place would be discovered within hours. The dogs would find them, or hunger would drive them into the open. Their brief rebellion against inevitability would end as all rebellions did in this place, with smoke rising from chimneys. His hand closed around the keys in his pocket. One boy, for certain, could navigate the camp's dangers. 5 children multiplied the risk exponentially. Mathematics again. Probability, chance, the cold equations of survival. The smallest child, a girl with eyes too large for her hollowed face, extended one skeletal hand toward him, not begging, not pleading, offering connection, humanity. Something the camp had systematically stripped away layer by layer until only animal survival remained. Jacob's memory flashed to his father's final words before the guards beat him silent. Remember who you are. He made his decision with quick, efficient gestures. Jacob motioned for them to follow. The children untangled themselves from their hiding place, emerging like shadows gaining substance. Their movements were clumsy with fear and weakness, but their eyes held absolute focus on Jacob, their unexpected savior, their silent Moses. The smallest girl slipped her hand into his. Her palm was fever hot against his cold fingers. The contact sent electricity through Jacob's arm, awakening something long dormant. Responsibility, connection, purpose beyond mere survival. Together, they became a small constellation of desperate stars, moving through the gathering twilight toward the generator shed and the possibility of freedom beyond. The generator shed vibrated at the camp's edge. Its drone masked 6 pairs of feet, navigating between the fences as Jacob led with a cartographer's confidence. Evening patrol would begin in 17 minutes. Searchlights would sweep the eastern perimeter in 12. The rhythm of the camp's security beat within Jacob's consciousness, like a second heartbeat. The smallest girl, her name yet unspoken between them, clung to his hand with surprising strength. Behind them, the other children followed in a chain of desperate hope, each grasping the clothing of the one ahead. Their collective breath formed ghostly plumes in the November air, spectral evidence of lives not yet extinguished. Jacob reached the generator shed's rusted door. 3 keys tried, 3 keys rejected, before the 4th slid home. The lock surrendered with a reluctant click that seemed thunderous in his heightened awareness. He ushered the children inside, pulling the door closed behind them. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the red glow of indicator lights. The smell of oil and metal replaced the camp's perpetual stench of suffering. The generator's pulse vibrated through the concrete floor into their bones. Jacob's memory reconstructed the shed's interior with perfect clarity. He had been brought here once to clean grease spills, one of countless menial tasks assigned to the camp's silent shadow. His fingers traced metal casings and wire housing until he found what he sought, the main control panel. Behind him, the children huddled together for warmth and courage. The oldest boy, perhaps 10, whispered something in Polish that Jacob couldn't understand. The words dissolved into the mechanical growl surrounding them. Language had become irrelevant. Only action mattered now. Through the shed's single grimy window, Jacob watched lights flicker on across the camp as day surrendered to evening. Searchlights awakened, their harsh beams cutting white arcs through gathering darkness. Guards emerged from barracks, rifles slung across shoulders. Somewhere, Obersturmfuhrer Kruger would be awakening to the realization of his catastrophic error. Jacob's hands hovered over the generator's controls. His perfect memory recalled every wire, every connection observed during his brief exposure to the machine's inner workings. Disabling it would plunge the camp into darkness and deactivate the electrified fence. But the backup systems would engage within minutes. Their window for escape would be measured in heartbeats. A distant alarm shattered the twilight, a shrill mechanical scream that announced discovery. Whether Kruger's missing keys or the children's absence had triggered it remained unknown. The distinction was academic. The hunt had begun. The smallest girl pressed herself against Jacob's side, her body trembling like a captured bird. He placed a reassuring hand on her head, then turned his attention back to the generator. Its massive form contained both their imprisonment and their salvation. Jacob seized a wrench from a nearby workbench and wedged it between critical gears. With calculated force, he twisted until metal screamed against metal. Sparks erupted in blue-white constellations, reflected in the wide eyes of the watching children. The generator's rhythm faltered, coughed, then disintegrated into mechanical death throes. Lights across the camp flickered, dimmed, and died. Darkness descended like a blessing, punctuated only by the crimson pulse of emergency lights and the distant, frantic beams of guards' flashlights. Jacob yanked the shed door open. Freedom waited in the gathering night, separated from them by a single fence now rendered harmless. He gestured urgently to the children, pointing toward the eastern boundary, where forest began 200 meters beyond the perimeter. Dogs barked in the distance, savage, hungry sounds that accelerated their terror into action. The children poured from the shed like water finding its level, Jacob bringing up the rear. The smallest girl's hand remained locked in his as they navigated by instinct and starlight toward the fence. With his free hand, Jacob tested the metal mesh. No electricity hummed beneath his fingertips. The backup generators had not yet engaged. He boosted the smallest children over first, their bird-like bodies barely disturbing the wire. The older ones climbed with desperate strength, tumbling to freedom on the other side. As searchlights swept closer and dogs barking intensified, Jacob hoisted himself upward, muscles straining against the weight of exhaustion and malnutrition. Barbed wire tore through his threadbare clothing, carving shallow furrows into his flesh. Pain registered as distant information, irrelevant to the imperative of movement. He dropped to the ground beyond the fence, landing beside the waiting children. The absent hum of electricity had been replaced by shouts and whistles, the camp awakening to their rebellion. Jacob pointed toward the dark line of trees in the distance. "Run," he mouthed silently, the word forming on lips that had forgotten speech. Together, they fled across open ground, 6 shadows merging with the greater darkness. Behind them, flashlight beams swept the area around the disabled generator. Ahead, the forest promised concealment, if not safety. The space between represented the most dangerous passage of their lives, exposed, vulnerable, illuminated by nothing but faith and starlight. The forest swallowed them whole. Pine needles cushioned their footfalls as the scent of resin replaced the camp's miasma with air that tasted of possibility. Jacob led them deeper into the wilderness, away from searchlights that strafed the forest edge like mechanical predators. Behind them, the camp's alarms continued their frantic cry, a sound that diminished with each step, but remained embedded in their consciousness like a splinter beneath skin. The smallest girl stumbled, her strength finally failing. Jacob caught her before she fell, lifting her slight weight into his arms. She weighed no more than autumn leaves, her bones fragile as a bird's, beneath his hands. Her head came to rest against his shoulder, absolute trust in the gesture. They continued for what might have been hours or minutes. Time had dissolved into meaningless abstraction. Distance alone mattered now. Every meter gained was a victory against death. The other children followed Jacob without question, their faith in his silent guidance absolute. A stream appeared, silver in the moonlight. Jacob gestured for them to drink. The water tasted of stone and stars, reviving something beyond their physical bodies. Perhaps hope, perhaps humanity. The oldest boy spoke, his voice a rusty hinge breaking the forest's solemn quiet. Müssen wir weitergehen? Must we go further? Jacob nodded, pointing deeper into the forest. The danger had not passed. Dogs could track them for kilometers. Morning would bring planes, searchers, consequences. The Reich did not surrender its prisoners easily, especially those who carried knowledge of what transpired behind electrified fences. The smallest girl stirred in his arms, her eyes reflecting fragments of moonlight. Her lips moved, forming words that emerged as a whisper. Jak się nazywasz? What is your name? The question penetrated layers of silence built over years of survival. Jacob hadn't heard his own name spoken aloud since his father's death. It existed only in memory, a secret thing preserved from contamination by the camp's horrors. His throat constricted around unspoken syllables. Speech had become foreign territory, a country from which he had been exiled. Yet something stirred within the wasteland of his voice, a seed breaking through frozen ground after endless winter. Jacob, he whispered, the sound strange and wonderful in the forest's embrace. His voice emerged broken, raw with disuse, but undeniably his own. Jestem Jakob. I am Jacob. The girl's smile transformed her hollow face, revealing the ghost of beauty that starvation had nearly erased. Estera, she replied, offering her name as a gift in exchange for his. The other children murmured their own names: Tomasz, Lilka, Beniek, David, each syllable a reclamation of identity. The camp had attempted to replace with numbers. They stood in a tight circle beneath the ancient pines, no longer prisoners, not yet survivors, suspended in the fragile space between captivity and freedom. A distant howl shattered their momentary peace, the unmistakable voice of a tracking dog catching their scent. The hunt continued. Jacob set Estera gently on her feet and pointed westward, where the forest grew denser, offering deeper concealment. Musimy biec, Estera said with quiet resolve. We must run. Jacob nodded, taking her hand once more. Together, they plunged deeper into the wilderness. 6 children against an empire, armed with nothing but the desperate courage of those with nothing left to lose. The forest embraced them, branches parting to accept their flight, roots steadying their uncertain steps. Dawn found them huddled beneath a rocky overhang beside a wider stream. Exhaustion had claimed the younger children, while Jacob remained awake, listening to the forest's morning chorus, replacing the mechanized rhythms of captivity. Estera sat beside him, her slight shoulder pressed against his arm. Dokund Ijemi? Where are we going? She asked, her voice barely audible above the stream's gentle murmur. Jacob's mind, so accustomed to precision and calculation, could offer no certain answer. The geography of freedom remained unmapped territory. He had memorized every centimeter of captivity, but possessed no chart for liberation. The words came slowly. Na południe, du partyzantów. South, to the partisans. Rumors had circulated through the camp. Resistance fighters in the southern forests, Jews and Poles who had escaped, fighting with salvaged weapons and desperate courage. Perhaps only legend, perhaps salvation. Estera's small hand found his, fingers intertwining. Będziemy wolni. We will be free. Jacob looked at the sleeping children, at the forest stretching around them, at morning light filtering between trees. Freedom remained a distant shore, separated by hunger, winter, pursuit, and war. Yet for the first time in 3 years, possibility existed. He squeezed Estera's hand gently and discovered within himself the capacity for speech once more. Words emerged like water from stone, each one a small miracle of reclamation. Już jesteśmy. We already are. The forest absorbed his words, carrying them toward the lightening sky. Behind them, the camp continued its grim business. Ahead, war raged. But here, 6 children had rewritten the equations of their existence beyond barbed wire and numbered tattoos. Jacob tilted his face toward the breaking day, feeling warmth touch his skin. His voice, newly rediscovered, held steady as he spoke again. Not to Estera, not to the sleeping children, but to the memory of his father that he carried within. I remember who I am. The hunt never ends. You thought that we wouldn't find out, didn't you? the note read. The man had shivered when he had read those ominous words, as perspiration began to drip down from his temple, the salty liquid seeping into his eyes and temporarily blinding him. "This is the end," the man had said to himself in an agitated, trembling whisper as he looked down at the sheet of notepaper which had been left on his office desk. He glanced around at the other employees to see if anyone was looking his way, giving him some indication on who had left the message. But all of them were engaged in their own little world of toting up the facts and figures which were constantly coming through on their computer terminals. What had caused this man to turn deathly white and feel so nauseous? How had those 9 little words on the page that had now turned his world completely upside down come to cause him so much anguish and despair? That unhappy event had happened a week before. So let us now find out what had caused this man, Henry Miller, to end up in this now distressing location where he now found himself. At this moment, he was looking between the slats of a Venetian blind, observing the street outside, and trying as best as he could to remain unseen from the road in front of the building, where he now cringed, frightened out of his wits. How had it come to this? He thought. Last week, he didn't have a care in the world. All was going well at work. And then came that note, and he found himself involved in something that had instantly changed his life. And now he was on the run, constantly looking over his shoulder. And at this moment, hiding in this abandoned building, a structure that had a large sign outside stating that it was condemned and would shortly be torn down. So, how long could he remain here before he had to find another place of sanctuary? The year is 1948. The war is over. After 6 years of bloodshed and butchery by a psychopath and his evil, willing collaborators, during which an estimated 80 to 100 million people had died or been murdered. The Nuremberg trials had finished, and many, many hundreds of German Nazi war criminals had found justice on the end of a rope for crimes against humanity. Then, there were some who had decided that a cyanide pill was a much quicker way to escape the noose of retribution. Others, seeing that the end was near, had made their getaway before the Russians entered Berlin and tortured them, finding their way to South America, where many of them lived for a while, trying to evade the men from the Simon Wiesenthal organization, people dedicated to finding every last Nazi and bringing them to justice, headed by their leader, a man known as the Nazi Hunter, who was a Holocaust survivor. Even though many years have passed, the hunt still goes on, still finding those vile and depraved monsters, a subspecies of the human race. Although some are well into their dotage, justice is still being served. A particular case in point is the case of Adolf Eichmann, who, along with Heinrich Himmler, was the architect of the final solution, where 6 million Jews were sent to the death camps, only to be gassed, their bodies cremated, and the remains crushed. Eichmann was finally located in Argentina in 1961, thinking that after 16 years he was safe. But justice caught up with him, and he met the Grim Reaper on the end of a rope a year later. But returning to Henry Miller, a man who had changed his name from Henrik Mengele and who had managed to escape from his home in Germany to live in Spain, a neutral country during the war, just after the conflict had begun. The surname he was born with, Mengele, was the same name as the man who was once revered by the Nazi Party for his inhumane and horrific experiments on unwilling participants. The infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele, a man given the name of the Angel of Death, a man, if indeed he could even be called that, who performed appalling and unspeakable experimentation on live inmates of the concentration camp at Auschwitz. Most of those subjects dying a lingering, painful, and agonizing death, all in the cause of making the so-called German master race into a nation of blue-eyed, blonde, Aryan supermen. But what had caused Henry to be reduced to his present situation? It was all due to that one large letter that he had found on his desk just over a week before, which caused him a great deal of torment. He had read the words, his trembling hands trying to stop the shaking that was coursing through his body. The words that read, "You thought that we wouldn't find out, didn't you?" For many years, he had feared that maybe someone, somewhere, at some time, might find out about his namesake and make his life a living hell, maybe even murder him, with the idea that he was in some way engaged in the work carried out by that misguided and psychotic mass murderer, and had, somehow, missed out on receiving the same fate that had befallen the other members of the Nazi death squads. But he had been so careful, and had never told anyone of his former name, or his possible relationship to the Angel of Death at Auschwitz. So, how could someone have found out where he lived or worked? The only way out that he could think of was to go on the run, getting well away from anyone he had worked with and from where he had lived. He had no plan, just a crazed idea that he must stay out of sight in this empty building before he made his next move. All sorts of wild ideas coursing through his brain. Thoughts that he had never even dreamt about, up until now, came into his mind. It was a few weeks later in the office where Henry had formerly been employed, a place from which he had mysteriously disappeared some time previously, without explanation. One of the other employees who had worked with him had just read an article in the newspaper that had shocked him. It mentioned that his former workmate had been found dead in an abandoned building, having seemingly committed suicide by ingesting a cyanide pill. As tears welled up in his eyes, he murmured words that he found extremely difficult to say. "Henry, what happened? Why did you do it?" "Just as your friends here were organizing a surprise party for your birthday. You tried so hard to keep it a secret, and you thought that we wouldn't find out, didn't you? So today's story has come to an end. Or perhaps it never really ended. There are mysteries still there, questions still unanswered, and sometimes things that seem to only exist in stories can creep into reality in unexpected ways. Are you sure that when you turn off the sound, everything around you will still be normal as before? Or is there something watching you? Either way, always remember that these are just stories, or at least we want to believe that they are. If you like moments of suspense, tension, and breathlessness, don't forget to follow me so you don't miss the next stories. And next time, when you come back, make sure you are ready, because what awaits you may be even scarier than you thought. See you again if you still have the courage to continue listening.